The Cimmerians had been the dominant power in the region north of the Caucasus and west of the Volga River for quite some time. But everything changed as the Scythians, who lived in a land east of the Volga River, began to cross it and migrate into the territory of the Cimmerians. There arose a great terror among the Cimmerians. The general Cimmerian population were so terrified of them that they wanted to give up their land without any fight. But the royal Cimmerians, who were as numerous as the other Cimmerians, didn't want to leave their country, and so there arose disagreement among the Cimmerians. But in the end, the royal Cimmerians, in despair, divided themselves into two groups and fought each other till death. They were buried somewhere near the river Tigris, and the rest left their country, leaving it wide and open for the Scythians to come and take over without any difficulty. Herodotus of Halicarnassus, writing in the 5th century BC, writes that the Cimmerians fled from the Scythians and went along the sea shore, keeping the Caucasus mountain to their right. Some scholars, however, consider this narration to be imaginary, pointing out the fact that according to this narration, the Cimmerians fled eastward, the very same direction from which the Scythians were coming, and then their way. If they were coming along the Caucasus shore of the Black Sea, the mountains in these regions are so close to the sea that it leaves only a narrow passage, which would have been impassable for such a large number of people in those periods. We do have some Assyrian records relating to this event of their migration, from the north of the Black Sea region, southwards, through the Caucasus into West Asia, but the description of their exact route is not stated. Anyway, the Cimmerians came to the place, which the Assyrian sources refer to as Gamir, the land of the Cimmerians, on the northern border of the kingdom of Urartu, in present-day Azerbaijan. And this is where the Cimmerians initially settled during the 720s BC. The Cimmerians' first target was inevitably the first they come in contact with, that is the kingdom of Urartu, a small kingdom that was no match for them in any way. After invading the Urartu, the Cimmerians would then go on to destabilize the political balance, which had prevailed in the region between the kingdoms of the Near East and Anatolia. But before moving on to the chaos and disorder that the Cimmerians caused here, let's first look at another group of Cimmerians, who seems to have headed west from their Pontic homeland, circling the Black Sea, until they make contact with the Thracian tribes. But here in Thrace, no one knew how to read and write at this point, and so the only thing that can tell of these events is archaeology. Apart from this, we have no idea how many Cimmerians turned this way, and in what situation. It is known that the Cimmerians settled amongst the Thracian tribes, and brought with them the metal objects, whose place of origin is assumed to be in the northern Black Sea region, and in the Caucasus, which were foreign to the Urnfield culture, for which no local model existed, and eventually creating a unique culture, known as the Thraco-Cimmerians culture. Some of these groups were then beginning to explore further, along the Danube River, entering regions that are controlled by the Celts of the Hallstatt culture, and also influencing the Illyrians on the western side of the Balkans. The weight of the evidence shows that there was indeed horse-based warrior culture here, in the 8th century BC. In successive waves, these migrating warrior groups pushed west, towards the headwater of the Danube, before veering off to the north. It's quite surprising that there are Cimmerians finds even in Epirus, on the Adriatic coast. So the Cimmerians spread quite far and wide after their expulsion. Sometimes after stopping in these regions, the Cimmerians followed the coast of the Black Sea, and then crossing the Bosphorus Strait, finally made it to Asia Minor, and rejoined other groups, who had by then already established themselves in two areas in West Asia. Greek geographer and historian named Strabo states that the Cimmerians brought the Trares and the Edens with them in their attack on Asia Minor. The Trares and the Edens were people from the west coast of the Black Sea, and so this is another confirmation of the western migration of the Cimmerians. Now back to where we were on the story of Eastern Cimmerians' arrival into West Asia. So the Cimmerians on the northern border of Urartu had already become a problem for the Urartian king Rusa. Rusa at this point had been dealing with a lot lately. There was a rebellion in his kingdom, and then his commander-in-chief with 5 of his provincial governors had seized Urartu, and then he was expecting an invasion from Sargon II, king of Assyria, and on top of all these, the Cimmerians were preying on his northern border. King Rusa, for some reason, chose to march south, to take care of the Assyrians first, before facing the Cimmerians. But the Urartian army under Rusa was defeated at Yishdish. Rusa fled to the mountains in fear of his life, and Sargon II ravaged the heartland of Urartu. But he eventually turned back, and returned. Rusa now marched to face the Cimmerians in battle, but this was another disaster, and he had to fled again to the mountain. 9 of his governors were slain, and his country was completely wide and open for the barbarian invasion. Sometimes after this event, Rusa learns that Musasir, the holiest city of Urartu, has fallen to Sargon II, and hearing this, Rusa kills himself with his sword. These events can be found in the Assyrian records. One of the intelligence reports sent to Sargon II, between 720 and 714 BC, states that Rusa marched his troops to Kurgamir, land of Cimmerians, but was defeated. Another intelligence reports that Cimmerians did invade the Urartu from the territory of the Manians, which dates to the same period. Cimmerians, having defeated the Urartu, who had contained their advances, were now able to expand in the region. And a section of the Cimmerians moved into the area of the kingdom of Manians. Transcaucasia became the base from which the Cimmerian troops marched, probably until the beginning of the reign of Ashurbanipal. Around 713 BC, the Sargon is noted for using the Cimmerians with his army in his campaign, possibly for their ability as mounted warriors. In 705 BC, Sargon II dies, most likely during a campaign against the kingdom of Tabal. After his death, the Cimmerians cease being mentioned in the Assyrian record. This is probably because Sargon's son and successor Sennacherib secured the northwestern borders of Assyria, and so the Cimmerians were not a big threat anymore, and so not the people to be concerned with. They would start being mentioned again under the reign of Esarhaddon, the son and a successor of Sennacherib. Whatever may have happened between the Cimmerians and the Scythians in the Pontic steppe, but here in the Near East, they were allies between 680 and 677 BC, and they together with Manians were attacking Assyria, and were able to expand their territories, and even capture 2 of its fortresses. But these allied forces were defeated by Esarhaddon, and the Scythian king Isbekiah was killed during the retaliatory military campaign. Around the same period in 679 BC, in a military text, King Esarhaddon claimed to have killed the Cimmerian leader Tushpa, with all his troops, in the land of Hubushna. After this event, Isbekiah's son and successor Bartachua made an alliance with the Assyrians, by asking Esarhaddon his daughter in marriage, as a wife for himself. And so the Scythians changed their sides and allied themselves with the Assyrians, but the Cimmerians remained hostile to the Assyrians, while being an ally to the Manians and the Medes. Sometimes later, however, there was a negotiation that followed, between the Assyrians and the Cimmerians, according to which the Cimmerians promised not to interfere in the relations between Assyria and Media. Babylonian diviner, however, warns Esarhaddon not to trust either the Manians or the Cimmerians, and advised him to spy on both of them. In 675 BC, the Cimmerians were present on the border of Media. In the year 667 BC, they were on Manian territory, and around 665 BC, they moved to the south into the Median territory, and were its allies. These eastern Cimmerians were recorded by the Assyrians as a possible threat against the collection of tribute from the Media. Around the same period, the Cimmerians, in alliance with the Scythians, were menacing the Assyrian provinces and threatening their communication with its vassals. So this was the story of the eastern Cimmerians. But there is also another division of the Cimmerians. Around 709 BC, some Cimmerians turned west and began to move towards the Anatolian region. And King Midas II, who had held the Cimmerians at bay in the previous decade, and who was a bitter enemy of Assyria, sent a delegation to Sargon II in an attempt to form an alliance against the Cimmerians. His delegation was, however, rejected, and the Cimmerians made it to Asia Minor. And during the period around the rule of the Assyrian king Esarhaddon, the bulk of the Cimmerians migrated into Anatolia, leaving only a small group remaining in the area near the kingdom of Menia, and hence forming two divisions of the Cimmerians, the eastern and the western, with the western being bigger and more powerful than the east. And with this opens a completely new chapter in the history of the Cimmerians, which we will explore in the next upcoming video. I hope you are enjoying my work. If you do so, you can buy me a coffee, the link is in the description. Or you could always like this video and subscribe to this channel. And as always, thanks for watching.